think it was right before I left for the Florida trip. Like I just went in there and she had like almost what it looked like a broken leg. Like her leg was like super swollen. She wasn't using it at all. And that's one thing that is insane with the Takydromus that I've noticed is their ability to heal. Like I showed my vet and he was like, yeah, when you get back, might have to take the leg. I was like, come on, man. Like, good Lord. And he's like, yeah, it could happen. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll see when I get back. When I got back, like new, like nothing happened. She was using it. She was walking around, no problems.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. I am finally bringing back the roundtable format for this episode of the podcast. For those of you who don't know, the roundtables are an opportunity for me to bring on more than one guest and for us to hash out a topic. It's been, I think, 18 months since I've done one. They are a little bit more time-consuming as far as editing and prep goes, so it's something that I have had a trouble bringing back, and I was happy to bring this one back. This was a suggestion from Mike Tytula, who's one of the guests on today's episode. If you haven't listened to any of the roundtable episodes and you would like to, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. Just click on the roundtable header and you'll find the other 5 or 6 episodes we've recorded up to this point. There's a ton of different topics, talking about vivarium plants. We discuss co-habbing. We discuss how to figure out which animal or pet is right for you. There's a bunch of them in there. Whether or not bioactivity is the gold standard of husbandry. There's some good episodes in there, and I recommend going to check them out. Today we have 2 repeat guests on the podcast. We are speaking with Armen Keuylian of HerpTime, as well as Mike Tytula from Alpha Reptile and the Jungle Vault. This episode is centered around the genus Takydromus. For those of you who are unaware, Takydromus is a genus of lizard. Maybe you've heard the common name just grass lizards. They are a genus of lizard within the Lacerta family. Now, as you know, if you're a common listener of the podcast or a regular listener of the podcast, you know that I like to promote the keeping of smaller species because I think it's a pretty straight line between keeping smaller species and being able to offer more enrichment and larger enclosures, and the list continues to go on. And Takydromus really fit the bill perfectly, and Mike keeps them as well as Armen, and we decided that this is a genus that does not have enough promotion in the hobby, and they aren't as popular as they ought to be. And when you listen to the episode, it'll be very clear why these are an incredible species to keep, and you'll be also questioning yourself why they are not more popular. Now, we generally focus on Dorsalis and Smaragdinus, the 2 species, but we also do talk a little bit about sexlineatus as well. There are a few other species. I actually think there's about 20 species in the world, but really those 3 are the ones that are commonly kept within herpetoculture. And like I said, they are an incredible, amazing genus, an amazing group of species to work with, and you will see that if you are somebody who's interested in keeping small monitor-esque lizards, then this is an episode that you'll want to listen to because it will absolutely pique your interest in this genus. If you're looking for more information, like I said at the beginning, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find the show notes for all the episodes that have been recorded. Thank you so much to customreptilehabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find affiliate links in both the YouTube description as well as the show notes. And thank you very much to all the Patreon supporters. You can find us at patreon.com/animalsathome. We are getting very close to that $500 a month buffer. That's my goal for Patreon, and that does cover all the editing. I do outsource the editing for the podcast. We're very close to hitting that goal, and I'm hoping we can hit that goal in the next month or 2. So if you're not on the Patreon and you would like to help support the podcast financially, that's the best way to do that. And I think that's it. Let's jump into the episode. Enjoy. Well, Mike and Armen, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you very much for being here.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's honestly, I don't even know the last time I've recorded a roundtable episode. I think it was the one, Mike, was your last suggestion with the plants. I think that might have been the last one, and that was honestly like 2020, I think. So it's been a very, very long time. Maybe 2021. I forget. Anyway, Time has like completely disappeared over the last couple of years, but it is good to do another one. And again, this was another one of Mike's suggestions talking about the genus Takydromus, which I had the pleasure of seeing his collection when I was out there a couple of months ago, which was awesome. And Armen keeps them as well. So we thought, as the listeners of the podcast know, I've been slowly promoting smaller species and trying to get into that space a little bit more, at least talk about it more. And there are so many species that fit that bill that we don't talk about enough. And I think this is a perfect example of that. So why don't we just quickly lay out each of your experience working with this genus, and then we'll kind of get into more of the nuance about the genus as well. So, Mike, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I started like seriously actually keeping them about 2 years ago now, like pretty much right when I moved out here to Ontario. That was like one of the first things that I was like, you know what? I've wanted these for forever. I have never been able to find these green ones back since I worked in a pet store, like when I was like 14. So, 12 years ago, something like that, 14 years ago.
Is that where you first saw them, at the pet store that you worked at?
Yeah. So
Okay.
when I first started, they always came with the long-tail grass lizards or the sexlineatus, like the most common $20 ones you can find at the pet store. But then every now and then they'd have a green one come in. And those, I didn't know they were different species, but at the time it was just kind of like, okay, yeah, cool. Another one came in, like whatever. And now that I actually know what they were, it's like, oh man, $20 for one of those. Holy crap. Canadian too. So like 3 pennies American.
So it just ends up in the shipment, and you could have easily bought it for such a cheap price. And now maybe we'll get into pricing a little bit later. Obviously, they're a little bit more pricey than just the $20 American or a Canadian.
Yeah.
So you had them for 2 years. So maybe you could just quickly kind of outline when you got them and kind of what you're working with.
Yeah, so I have Takydromus smaragdinus, and I also have Takydromus dorsalis. The smaragdinus are the ones that I got 2 years ago, and I've been keeping them ever since. They've been doing great. Same trio that I've had the whole time. Those ones came from Europe as a trio from Poland, I believe. And then the dorsalis I got... Well, it's funny because Mason was kind of wrapped up in that story as well. But I got them physically, I believe, in like June this year, and have been keeping them ever since. But I bought them, and I think, oh man, like March, and I basically had Mason babysit them for a couple months until shipping weather was good, and then he shipped them up to me. So they are American. I guess I don't know if they were bred in America or if they were imported to America, but now they're Canadian.
Funny thing, I know the guy that you got those from, and he was supposed to give them to me, and I didn't reply to him immediately, and then you bought them. I was so mad.
Rico?
Yeah, Rico.
Yeah, that's funny.
I have like 10 babies from him.
Oh, so you're the one that bought all of them.
I would always buy his babies consistently. Yeah. And I said, whenever you get rid of the pair, let me. Yeah, I never told you. I was really mad. This was before I met you, and I was like,
okay.
Man, that guy sucks.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. No.
So now they're Canadian lizards, and they should be American lizards. So maybe, Armen, maybe you could let us know where your journey with Takydromus begins.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have it in Canada, but there used to be, before Morph Market, even same ages like Fauna Classifieds, there's kingsnake.com. And I had always seen it on the classifieds there every now and then, the Takydromus dorsalis. And I was like, man, those are so cool. They're just, I like little lizards, and I like bright green. Green's my favorite color. So I'm like, that's like the coolest lizard ever. So fast forward, I was like elementary school, middle school when I saw them. I didn't have any money, and I didn't know you could ship lizards. So I'm like, it's a dream. Fast forward, I got into them maybe 4 years ago, and from your pair is actually where I got not all the babies I had the last few years were from your pair, actually. So I just became friends with Rico. That's who had the pair. I don't know where he got his pair, so I just kept them that way, and then I got into the Smaragdinus as well. Just randomly collected a male here, a female here, another female here. And then through someone who's been importing and exporting for like 50 years, he had originally imported a bunch of them, the dorsalis, probably 20 years ago. And they don't come in anymore. But one person that he sold to still has bred them this whole time. So he had about 10, 15 come in, from that original person, and that's where I got a different bloodline than the one you have, Mike.
Nice.
So anyway, regardless, I've been into them forever. They're super cool. They're so fun. They fit into what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah, they are a really interesting group of species, and they, for whatever reason, they're not as common as you think they ought to be. Like you said, Mike, is it the sexlineatus? That's the conventional like grass lizard. You know, people see like the long-tailed grass lizard. Those are somewhat common. I didn't even realize those were Takydromus, but I guess they are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, so why don't we break down the genus a little bit more for listeners who are completely unfamiliar with it? I mean, there's a bunch of species that are not commonly kept in the hobby at all, I don't think, but maybe we can just kind of review some of the more common ones. So, Mike, did you want to just jump in and just kind of, you've already mentioned dorsalis and smardinus. Let's just chat about what makes them different and sort of what they look like.
I guess the dorsalis to me are much larger, although I think Armen has some smaller ones too. I mean, feel free to talk about that, but
anyway, continue.
Yeah, like mine I know are, oh man, I just talked to him about this because I knew this question was going to come up, but it was like 4 or 5 years ago he's had them, or like 4 or 5 years he's had them. And they're, I guess a good size comparison would be like a large green anole in terms of body size, and then a tail that's probably 300% the length of their body. But to me, those are, I believe they're the largest in the whole genus. Could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure. But then there's the Smaragd genus, which are much smaller. The male is sexually dichromatic, so he's got like the 2 brown lateral lines down the dorsal, and the females are all entirely green. There's, as we mentioned, the Takydromus sexlineatus, which is pretty much just like a various shades of brown kind of lizards. I know there are some that have some green in them as well, and there's a potential new species or undescribed species that has like nice white portholes as well. That can be a trait of males, but it's not like indicative as far as I know. There's 24 species in the entire genus currently described. So most of those are not kept in the hobby. As far as I know, it's just these 3 that are kind of the most common. Maybe Armen can kind of tune in there.
Yeah, did you have anything to add to that? Yeah.
Definitely. So, one sec. There are other species in Europe that I'm trying to get right now. Oh gosh.
I know there's like the Takydromoides. I don't know if those are in captivity.
There's septentrionalis. That's one that I
those
know
are currently captive bred in Europe.
Yeah, and I know someone here that has a bunch of males, but no female. So, yeah. So there's a few floating around in Europe that I'm making an effort to try to get over here, similar to the anoles. I mean, it's just usually old guys in their basement that have had them forever, and they just keep them going. And you got to find the right person that knows them and get them to the Ham Reptile Show to ship them over here. So, but yeah, as far as I know, just the sexlineatus, the dorsalis, and the smardinus are the big ones that are being captive bred in the U.S. and Canada.
Well, and they are, I think, Mike, you had mentioned the length of the tail. That's probably like one of the most striking things when you see them. Like, I remember looking at Mike's in his enclosures, like you find the head and then you start tracking the entire body with your eyes, and then you're like, what the hell's going on here? Like, it almost looks like a cartoon. Like, it just continues to go all the way down into the enclosure. It is kind of amazing that natural selection chose, built such a long tail on the bodies. Are all species within that genus have basically the same tail length? They're all extremely long.
Yeah. Like as far as I know, the sexlineatus actually has the longest of the tails in terms of like proportion to their body size. I think there's some study that was posted and it was like 420% length. So like substantially longer than the body. And it's really cool. The tail, in my experience, they basically tie it in like a knot. Like it's not a full prehensile tail where they'll like wrap it all the way around and really grip a branch, but they'll basically like jump and they tie their tail in a knot. And as they fall, it just kind of tightens and they stop. So it's hilarious to watch them like jump down to the bottom for food and stuff because they just like dangle in midair and then eventually drop to the ground. They're such funny little critters.
Yeah. They really are. And as far as regions of the world, is it Asian? And I'm not sure if there's any in Russia. I know in Japan as well. Armen, did you have an idea of the sort of the native range off the top of your head? I think,
correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but it's just Asia mainly.
Yeah, mainly. So there's one species that, like Takydromus in general, is the largest longitudinal, like top to bottom, range of any genus. So there's some that range all the way into Russia and then all the way through Indonesia. So they have like an insanely long range or wide range, I guess. But yeah, the main like hotspots are in Asian countries, whether it's Japan or China, Hong Kong, all that.
Mm. And then as far as what makes them such great animals to keep, I mean, you've kind of alluded to it with their behaviors and whatnot, but maybe one of you want to just touch on, I mean, we talked about the size. Obviously, size is really appealing because you can keep them in a large enclosure without taking up an entire room. But what about the group of species is so entertaining to keep? Armen, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. They're just extremely active and they're not shy at all. They're the best part of a green keel-bellied lizard, best part of a tree monitor, best part of an anole, all combined into one. They're, like you said, the compact size. They go absolutely nuts for food. No matter what you're feeding them, if it's moving, they're chasing it. Or if you're feeding them like mixed gecko food, they're lapping it up like a crack or something. They're so fun to watch, and they're really one of the perfect candidates for a beautiful terrarium because you can build a beautiful planted terrarium and not worry about them hiding. They're kind of always going to be out, either under the UV or just cruising around. If they're still, they're usually still like on a branch where you can see them. Otherwise, they're always cruising. They're just, Mike, I'm sure, has much more to say, but for me, they're just one of the best visually, like, I don't know, like kind of how a tetra is in a fish tank. It's kind of just cool because they're always moving and they're just fun to watch, and it's a bright green animal.
Yeah. And Mike, what about you?
Yeah, and in terms of like my thoughts, very similar. I mean, that's why I wanted to make this podcast, because I always hear people saying, "Oh yeah, you know, the mini tree monitors, the green keelbelly lizards," and I'm like, man, everybody's skipping over the Takydromus. Like they're smaller, they're equally or more kind of inquisitive and intuitive in terms of like picking up on habits and stuff. They're, like Armen said, they're always out, and using like a vivarium analogy, like they're kind of like dart frogs. Like they're more hands off, especially some of the smaller species like the sexlineatus and the smartest genus. The dorsalis, at least mine, are like crazy handleable in a way. Like they're very interacting. I'll open the tank and they'll come flying out onto my shoulder and he'll run around and hop right back in. Yesterday I had the male, he kind of swan dived out of the enclosure onto my shirt and saw that I was holding a cup of crickets, and he jumped and missed my arm, landed on the floor, kind of scurried under the rack, and Bree was standing at an opposite corner, and she looked at me and she's like, he's looking directly at you. So I just held a cricket down like onto the floor, and he came right out, grabbed it, hopped onto my hand, and I just let him back in the tank. Like it was so funny. And then in terms of like the vivarium, like I was saying, like they're like a dart frog in a way, that they're kind of hands off, but they're, like Armen said, they're always out, they're always active, they're always doing something. And when they're not, they are typically just basking or hanging out on a very open, exposed area. So yeah, they're a lot of fun.
And as far as the difference between the dorsalis and smaragdinus, am I saying that right? Smaragdinus?
I think Armen and I say it two different ways, but I don't think either is really wrong.
I don't. Yeah, Latin
Just
names.
Latin, whatever it is. There's a G and a D too close together to make it make sense.
Yeah.
As far as their appearance wise between the two species is because they are both kind of very bright green lizards, and for whatever reason when I was looking at the dorsalis, they looked like more teal. I don't know if that was just like my color blindness coming in, but are there any morphology difference between those two species?
They can be confused. I think the females can be confused for dorsalis because they don't have the brown, but the smaragdinus or smaragdinus, whatever, the males are definitely, you can tell the difference. And the dorsalis are definitely, they can lean more, like you said, the teal or bluer side, but they'll still be green. Just like the green keel belly lizards can be really bright green or lean more to the teal. I've noticed depending how they're raised or where they come from, the dorsalids can also kind of change color like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I noticed when mine hatched, they were like bright teal, like a really blue-green, like gorgeous color. And within probably about a month of them hatching, they turned to the more kind of emerald green. Part of me wonders if like the blue ones are kind of like a bronia, where if they're bright teal blue, then they're not necessarily getting what they really need to thrive, like whether it's UV or carotenoids, or I don't even think anybody's really figured out that question yet. But I know those both play a role in it. So I don't know. I don't think there's really enough people that breed them or keep them to really understand if there's a big difference in that. I think the dorsalis, right along kind of the jawline, they have more of a brown or like a dark black like line, like one scale width line down. And I don't think I've seen it on the smaragdinus, but I'd really have to look at two pictures right next to each other to fully for sure say that. And then obviously the size difference, like the dorsalis get twice the body size of a smaragdinus.
Yeah, so it's funny because when you look at, they're kind of unassuming in a way. Like if you look at one of those animals, you think they're kind of go under the radar for a lot of people because they're just green lizards, and it's in the same way green anoles go under the radar for people, right? Like it's just a green lizard. Do we really need more of these? But this is where the behavior of the animal is so important, and we ought to be promoting these types of animals that are exciting to keep and are fun and interactive for everybody. And I mean, green anoles do that as well. For whatever reason, I think we talked about this, Armen, when you were on the podcast last. They just become like a garbage animal that die, and people don't respect them. But I feel like Takydromus has a future ahead of it as far as an animal that we can have in the hobby and can end up in a pet store where people who are maybe new to reptile keeping can have success with them, right? They're not super complicated to keep, and they are immediately should give you some positive feedback as far as why reptile keeping can be exciting. It's not literally just going to sit there.
Yeah, for sure. They just the fact that they're always out, and we keep comparing them to the green keel belly lizard. And I think it's important to note, no matter how you restrain them or move them or whatever, I've never been bit by a Takydromus, and they never tried to bite me. Versus a green keel belly lizard, they're known for being, sometimes you can get a friendly one, but 9 out of 10, they're mean and they want to bite you and they flick their tongue out at you. Mm-hmm. But the Takydromus, especially like Mike said, they learn very quick and they're not afraid of you, and they're ready to, be part of your family, essentially. They just want to know what's going on, and they're like how a golden retriever acts almost. It's kind of hilarious that a lizard can act so not afraid of something so much bigger than it, considering the bodies are just puny.
Yeah. Well, I remember Ryan McVeigh saying they're basically like a monitor lizard, but when they run fast, they trip over their own tail, or something like that. That was like his entire way to describe this genus, and it was like he's like they're just so awesome because of that. Like they're so fun and so interactive to watch. As far as price points and costs for them right now, what I'm kind of forgetting, because when I was helping you at the expo, Mike, I remember you were selling them, but I forget how much you were selling the hatchlings for and how much they cost to import. Are they pretty expensive at this point? Maybe Mike, you want to start with that?
Yeah. So I base a lot of my pricing actually on Armen. We text back and forth all the time. I'm like, hey, I'm selling this. What do you think I should sell it for? Like, what does it sell for in the States? And of course, the Canadian market's not anywhere near the same as the States, but typically I'll sell my male smart genus for about 225 Canadian. And the females seem to be much more infrequent, I suppose, in hatching, and I sell them for typically 300. But I'm thinking I might be dropping that price down a little bit. I've also sold, no, actually, I don't think we sold any to the States, but they've all sold in Canada. And then, oh no, I think Mason bought some. I don't remember.
Is that around the price you imported them for as well? Or?
I got a good deal on the smart genus through Ashley, but the pair that I got from the US was much higher. Like I think I ended up paying 900 USD for the pair, and then it'd been like about 220 to ship, so it was like 1,300 Canadian, 1,400 Canadian
for the dorsalis.
Yeah. So maybe I got gypped there. I don't know.
No, it's worth that. That was worth it. That's how much the babies around. I sell them for like USD. I sell pairs for 600, and I never sell females alone. I'd sell a male for 250 and a pair for 600. So
dorsalis.
Dorsalis.
Okay. What about your smart genus?
Similar pricing.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
The adult that pairs, produced probably several dozen babies. So for sure worth what you paid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess as of right now, the price point's a little bit high for like an entry person, but that doesn't mean that, you have lots of people who are sort of intermediate keepers who would love to get into them. And I'm obviously, as they end up into the herpetoculture community, the prices will come down. As breeders, for you guys, do you care about prices coming down? Do you think like, oh, I don't want to work with the animal if it comes down too far? Or obviously that's just a result of producing animals?
I'll let Armen tackle that one first.
Yeah. I prefer, one, I think like the 250 mark for a single lizard is a good area to be, like 200, 250, because it doesn't become like a leopard gecko or green and old price where you kind of have to know what have to know what you're getting to get it. You're not just, oh, that's a cool lizard, I'm going to buy that first thing you see on Morph Market. It's like you're going for it. And also I like higher prices because it's easier to keep things going when you can pay for it.
Yeah, but it's your business. Yeah.
Yeah. But even if they were worth like $50, I think it's a species I would for sure still keep, just because I don't think there's another species that size you can find that is like that personable. So I think that's really what makes it for me, regardless if they were $50 or 500 each. I think they're worth every penny, regardless of the price.
Yeah. I'm glad Armen hopped on that one, because I was going to say pretty much the same thing. I think where they are now is exactly that. Like, it's a good bar. It's not an impulse purchase, but it's also not thousands of dollars where it's like, oh man, I can't buy that right now. Like when you go to an expo, a herpetoculturalist, like somebody that's seasoned in the hobby, typically has that $250 kind of kicking around that they're like, you know what? Yeah, those are really cool. Like I'll splurge today, that kind of deal. I do know that one of my friends breeds the sexlineatus, and like she can't sell the offspring for $20.
Really?
And that's because they're still wild caught. They're still coming in for pennies on the dollar. It's sad because they are like, that's what I fell in love with. I genuinely, right before I moved, I was about to buy a trio of the sexlineatus from the place that I worked in Calgary. And I fell in love because they're those lizards that you go in a mist and they're sitting there immediately, just sitting there like jumping up like this, like letting the rain hit them, drinking, just loving it. And that's why I love them. Like, it didn't matter their price. Like, okay, yeah, it's $20. Like, that's great. But I wasn't going to treat it like a $20 lizard. You know, it wasn't going to be a throwaway pet or whatever. It's dead. Like, it's still important to me that it's well taken care of. And I think, like Armen said, the lower prices kind of encourage that, like the impulse buy, I don't know what this is, but it's $20. I got that, $20 bill in my pocket. I'd like to try and avoid that with them, but obviously as more people get them, it's going to come down, most likely at least.
That is a really good point, though, just having the price point as a protectionism against impulse purchasing, regardless of what species, it doesn't matter what species we're talking about, that, like you said, that $250 is actually a good price range for somebody who wants to take the hobby very seriously, right? They're not going to be afraid to set up a good enclosure and a good habitat for them and then have that $250 to go spend on the animal. It makes more sense than having, random kid that can get a $15 lizard for his birthday. Well, then we get into the green and old scenario. So it sounds like this genus really is just a great candidate for like a display vivarium, and you could probably go pretty large, I'm sure, to have a pretty interesting setup and it's something interesting to watch. So why don't we talk a little bit about the care, how we care for them? So maybe we'll start with enclosure size. Armen, do you have, obviously if you're breeding them, maybe you're keeping them in smaller enclosures than you could recommend, but do you have a recommendation there?
Yeah, so I personally think like the Smarsh genus, they're very small. Literally the body is in centimeters, less than 10 centimeters. Yeah, 8 centimeters body, and then rest is tail. So breeding them, I'll keep a pair in like a 12, 18 Exoterra, but they do fine in something like that, or they'll thrive in, like I have the largest Zoom Ed, same size as the largest Paludarium Exoterra makes, the 36-18-36. Mm-hmm. I have 5 dorsalis in it as a display, and they're always moving, always doing stuff. So regardless of size, they use the space amply. Obviously, bigger is usually better if you're doing a display, but they'll breed in a smaller enclosure and be perfectly happy if you give them everything they need, or they'll completely use a large one. So as long as they're pretty active and they'll find a way out if you give them a way out. So you got to make sure you have all the holes plugged up. But other than that, I think your imagination and your space is the limit if you can give them that. But again, just like how you would keep a day gecko, it's kind of same. A mid-sized day gecko, same size enclosure and kind of care, a little cooler, and they're very easy to care for.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Mike, for enclosure?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think personally, like I keep my trio in a 18-18-24. Seeing how much they use that, I wouldn't want to keep them in anything smaller. But I imagine a pair would be fine in like a 12-18, like Armen said. Obviously, I mean, I don't want to, reiterate exactly what he said, but pretty much that. Like, they will use every inch you give them. They are zipping around, cruising, checking out what's on this leaf, what's over here. They're always running around. So the largest enclosure you can is what I'd recommend, because a nice, like, bioactive or naturalistic, whatever, vivarium, they will use every inch of. So I encourage that. Ideally, in my hopes, and when we end up moving and having our own place, I'd love to have a display like Armen, whether it's 36-18-36 or even like a minimum of like 24-18-36. They do so well in there.
And then, Mike, why don't you just continue on with just how you set up the enclosure, just sort of decor and furniture wise? Is there anything specific that you do for these guys?
They like to cruise. They like to kind of surf through the leaves. Like, you'll literally watch them. They'll like put their hands up and they'll just kind of slide through the whole enclosure. So densely planted. Obviously, us, like Armen and I as breeders, like we need to find the eggs. Right. So my enclosure is basically just like it's called, I probably should, it's like liriope grass, I'm pretty sure. So it's basically just like a decorative grass that grows tall. I have that in the back of the enclosure. And then I have a little like Tradescantia in the front. And that's pretty much it, with like a bunch of branches kind of swooping in and out. In a display enclosure, like if somebody was just buying 1 or 2 from me, I just cram it with plants, have a few basking areas, UVB, heat. Those are definitely strongly recommended. And yeah, like that's how I would set it up. I mean, like I said, we're breeders, so it's a little bit more challenging to pack it full of stuff, but
yeah,
I think if you're specifically setting up an enclosure for them, you still want some vertical, like wood or roots or branches or whatever, but they also like linear stuff in the cage because they like to go back and forth. I mean, they'll still go up and down, but they really like to cruise back and forth on something, whether it's on the ground or on branches. And so I think giving them lots of not only the plants and grasses because they like to just frolic in that stuff, but also a few sturdy things for them to constantly walk on because they will use that, and then that's also kind of where they'll rest too.
It's kind of nice with being such small creatures; they just cannot destroy anything you put in there. Pretty much any level of branch or stick, they're going to be able to support their weight on without it snapping. And then Armen, as far as Mike had mentioned UV and heat, what are you doing in that area? I think you've mentioned before when you were on the podcast last time the type of lighting that you use, but maybe you could reiterate it.
Yeah, so I use it for all my reptiles that use UV, which is all of them, I guess. I give T5. I use all these lights. These are T5 dual fixtures, and then they have a UV light and a grow light. So the UV I use for the Takydromus is a 5.0, and these create enough heat to definitely heat them up enough, especially if you have something near the top. So ambient for them, I have them in a cooler room than this, and it's 75 Fahrenheit. And then once they get up to the hotspot, it's low 90s. That's how I keep them. The dorsalis can definitely go colder, but so can all of them can go. The ones in captivity generally can go definitely colder than 75 if your house drops below that, but that's just what I keep them at. So room temperature, and then definitely a hot spot on the top.
And is that basically ditto for you, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah, I forget. Are you using? Yeah, what are you using for I think you use some sort of halogen, or what were you using?
Yeah, so I just used the mini Exoterra, Zoom Ed, whatever you want to use, basking dome, I suppose. And then it depends on which enclosure, but most of the time I'm using the 35 watt Zoom Ed mini halogens, or I think that's what they're called. You're looking basically for a basking spot of low 90s. And then that's typically, in the studies that I've read, that's what they find the body temperatures of the Takydromus to be when they're catching them in the wild. So that's pretty much as best as we can go off of.
Yeah, exactly. And if they're active and moving around and eating and breeding, then it's probably the right thing. Yep. As far as eating, because I obviously they're eating insects for the most part, but Armen, you had mentioned that you had also fed them some sort of ready-made diet as well, like crested gecko diet. So,
yeah, like Pangea or Rapashi. They go nuts for it. So the more liquidy, it's easier for them to eat because they have really small mouths and tongues, but they'll still eat it thick, and they'll sniff it out and they'll come seek it out and just go crazy for it.
So that's another sort of giant green check mark for this genus of lizards, because I don't necessarily promote people to just use ready-made diets, although I do use a lot of ready-made diets for both my geckos, but they'll get insects as well once in a while because it's nice to get them to hunt and exhibit some natural behavior that way. But for many people, having a constant supply of crickets in the house or something is kind of a turnoff. So to be able to feed them ready-made diets is pretty key. Mike, are you feeding them ready-made diets as well, or mostly insects?
Mine's probably 95% insects. I did experiment, Brie and I experimented with feeding them some fresh fig, and they love it. So, I mean, that kind of goes with the ready-made diet thing. They're clearly will take advantage of fruits and nectars and such that come out of whatever is in their natural range. But yeah, I know a lot of Europeans actually tried Pangea. I talked to them,
just
and
the
they were
powder?
saying, Yep,
Yeah.
just a powder. I was like, why? He's like, it lasts for 5 days. I'm like, all right, sure.
So they just
I
lap
guess
up the dust.
that's what a lot of people in Europe with day geckos and the anoles do too. They just leave dry Pangea so that it can't go bad.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
not sure if I really agree with it, but
hey, it's going to save you on a teaspoon of water.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it is, especially if you're going on vacation and stuff. Like if you have several Takydromus, like Armen with the anoles and stuff, it's not a bad idea. If you're going for 3-4 days and you can leave a cup of dry, I guess, ready-made food in there and it lasts that entire time, why not? I personally wouldn't do it super frequently just for maybe hydration concerns, but
yeah, that would be my one concern.
Yeah, that's exactly mine too. Like I'm just like, I mean, I know I miss them enough, but still, it's like I'm here enough that I don't necessarily need to feed them a pre-made diet. But I love that they all take to it. Like both species that I keep take to it well. The babies take it well. Everything. So.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And as far as co-habbing, obviously we've mentioned a bunch of times, I think both of you have talked about keeping them in pairs or trios and whatnot. Is there a limit to that? I mean, obviously the enclosure size is important, but if you had a pretty large enclosure, do you think you could have quite a large colony of them? I assume you wouldn't want to cross species, but if you keep the same species together, Armen, what do you think? Do you think you could have like 10 of them in an enclosure?
Definitely. I keep on in my one that I have 5 in right now. I have 3 males. So, and they get along. I've seen no aggression, no nothing. They just go about their day. I've noticed that. Also, when I got in a bunch from the guy I mentioned in the beginning, who still has a friend who mass produces them, I kept them all together in a same size enclosure. It wasn't all bioactive and stuff. It was just quarantining them, the 36, 18, 36. And they got along. They all hung out. They acted normal. They slept on top of each other. They, did their thing. So I've never seen any aggression at all in the species. The only time anything can get aggressive is when they breed. Which the males, grab the female, and that's just kind of the nature of breeding. But other than that, I personally haven't. I don't know if you have, Mike, but
I know Mike had one incident.
Okay.
Yeah. I was gonna actually ask you about that, Armen. I was like, are your group like sexually mature, like they're producing, or are they still kind of growing out?
Yeah.
Oh, they are. Mm-hmm. Interesting, because my male, like maybe it's the multiple females option, but my male has just destroyed my female like 2 or 3 times. And I talked to Rico too, and he said the same thing. He's like, yeah, I had to take them apart every now and then just to, make sure she was okay. And not, I think it was right before I left for the Florida trip. Like I just went in there and she had like almost what it looked like a broken leg. Like her leg was like super swollen. She wasn't using it at all. And that's one thing that is insane with the Takydromus that I've noticed is their ability to heal. Like I showed my vet and he was like, yeah, when you get back, might have to take the leg. I was like, come on, man. Like, good Lord. And he's like, yeah, it could happen. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll see when I get back. When I got back, like new, like nothing happened. She was using it. She was walking around, no problems. And then just recently, probably a month and a half ago or so, same thing happened, but even worse. Like it was like bloody, a big gash in her leg. I had to use some colloidal silver to kind of tap it over. And again, like I was like, oh man, here we go. He's like, dude, what is going on? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like as far as I know, I'm feeding them plenty. They were happy and healthy, but I guess maybe sometimes it's just a breeding thing and you might grab the wrong part or something. Like I've never seen it happen. So I'm not sure what the context of the altercation or whatever is, but yeah, mine have just destroyed each other a couple times. But my Smaragdinus, totally cool. Never seen, like every now and then you can tell either the male got like bit or something like that. You can just see kind of a couple discolored scales, but like one shed and they shed all the time. One shed and it's gone, like totally healthy, normal, natural. And going on the point of like the health or regeneration ability. I had, when I first got them in, one of my female Smaragdinus had a necrotic tip to her tail. My vet came in, was like, you know what? I'll just do it. He like scalpeled the tip off, and with slight exaggeration, but not much, daily, I could see the tail growing back like normal. And now if I said one of these two Takydromus has a regen tail, you would have no idea which one it is. Like, to the point where each scale, the like keel part of the scale lines up all the way down the tail. So it's wild.
Yeah, I remember you saying that about the tails, because I remember when you were collecting them to sell them, you had a baby drop a tail, and that you ended up just leaving. But you said it's all good because they grow back and it regens like basically perfectly, which is incredible considering how much tail it has to regrow. It's not like a short little stubby tail. It's got to do a lot. So I guess as far as co-habbing, then there are probably some caveats. The main one probably just being paying attention, just watching, just checking up on things. And so I wonder Armen, do you have any? Was that 5 co-hab situation? Was that dorsalis or was that Smaragdinus?
That's dorsalis.
Oh, that was dorsalis. Okay.
Yeah. So I've seen again. Only time I've seen aggression is on females when they're getting bred. So I think the males just the personality of the Takydromus. They're everywhere. Lots of excitement, lots of movement. I'm sure I never seen them even breed. Honestly, I think I've seen them locked up once or twice, but consistently I don't. But I have seen injuries, which in that case I'll take the female out. But generally, I don't see any issues. But the females definitely can, like Mike's, they can get messed up in breeding. So
yeah. That's in general. I would just say like definitely doable. Just pay attention.
Yeah. And then as far as breeding goes, is there any things that you guys are doing specifically to make sure that's happening? Or basically if you have a trio in there, you're going to get eggs?
Yeah. Just keep them happy and they'll kind of do it.
How many eggs does the female lay? Is it just one at a time or? No,
it's like 2 to 3 to 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Some of the not so common species in captivity lay, like from the research papers I was reading, they have like up to 5 or 6 eggs at very, very, very most. But on average for all the common species, it's like 2, 1, maybe 3 if you're really lucky, that kind of deal. But in terms of breeding, I have noticed my Smaragdinus breeding, and it's like immediately after they lay a clutch of eggs. Like the male is right there waiting. So that's how I know. Half the time I walk in, I'm like, they're paired. And I'm like, well, now I got to look for eggs. But I have also noticed that they both kind of shut down for winter time. Like mine stopped producing probably 2 months ago or so. And I mean, that's also because we're intentionally cooling the room and stuff. I'm not sure if Armen has the same experience, but ours are definitely not producing anymore. So they take a couple months off for sure.
Well, they obviously go through probably a fairly significant cooling period in the wild, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the wild, they get it's almost, I have almost been tempted to keep them outdoors here in California because it's very similar to like where they are in Japan. So the coolest is like not even 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, which they can handle supposedly. It just scares me. But yeah, they definitely get cool. In my setups, I try to cool them down as much as I can. Granted, I have the AC running because it gets so hot from all the lights. But right now I try to cool everything down, so everything's producing a lot less, including them. I haven't gotten eggs from them in like, I don't know. I texted you last time I got eggs, Mike, probably like a month and a half, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then what about incubation time? How long is it until they hatch?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, okay. I have I need to make an Excel sheet of it. I've written down like every clutch and every hatch date that I've had. On average, I would say it's probably 45 days. That's about what's our room temp? Probably 78 or so. Maybe slightly higher in summer, but I've had between like 45 and 60 days at most kind of deal is their typical incubation for me.
Is that the same on your end, Armen? I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes it's a little quicker because it's a little warm, but if it is too warm, the eggs will go bad. So I try to keep them. I'll move them like to a totally different area because they need it to be, I think, below 80 degrees. So that's what I found.
And then what about the babies? Once they're hatching, how are they difficult to get going? Are they pretty eager to start their lives out and get them feeding? Or how is that? Is that a challenge at all? Maybe, Armen, you can start with that.
I've never had any challenge. I had my first babies like 2.5 years ago, and no problem at all. They just went crazy for I give them 1 week crickets and fruit flies just like I do my anoles, and just they act like their parents. So
they're just ready to go. Same with you, Mike?
Yeah. I have the only thing I've noticed, and that's totally a like fault on myself, is just maybe having a couple too many in a tank at one time. That's the only thing that I've ever noticed. Like sometimes there's just kind of failure to thrive type scenarios where maybe they get out competed, maybe not, but then I end up having to take them out and kind of raise them back to health. But it's like a dog pile. I dump some fruit flies in there, and they're all just like flying from all corners, flying.
Velociraptor.
Yeah, exactly. I call them my little compies. They're just flying around like crazy.
Are there like legitimate, like at this point, I feel like we've checked so many boxes, and I don't know how anybody could think that they're not a good species to keep and they're not a great species for the hobby. Are there any downsides that either of you can think of? Like, are there any things that you're like, if there's one or two things that I had to say about the species that make them not ideal to be kept, like let's put the price point aside. If some people can't afford a slightly more expensive lizard, that's fine. But is there anything in that list, or is it just all great? Does anyone? If I won't, Armen, do you have anything there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If you're talking like leopard gecko, where you just put mealworms and a water dish, this is a little more work because if you don't get a misting system, you are missing them once or twice a day because they drink from the mist. And again, if you are a crested gecko type person and you don't want to deal with bugs because crickets smell and they can be noisy, then that might be an issue for you too because there's no way. I mean, they'll eat the pre-made food, but they still primarily are eating insects. Mm-hmm. So besides having to eat insects and having to be misted, I don't think there's any, and those aren't even downsides. That just depends how lazy you are.
Yeah.
So, and you shouldn't be getting them if you're that lazy. Any reptile, really, if you're that lazy. So,
yeah, if those are downsides, you might not be into reptiles.
Yeah, in that case, I think there's zero downside to them.
Yeah. The only potential downside that I could think of is lifespan. I know some people like my leopard gecko's 19 years old, like, old men, but as far as I know, you'll get kind of a handful of years out of them. Like, truthfully, again, like most reptiles in the hobby, I think with advancing care and whatnot, I think the lifespans are slowly starting to extend a little bit. But from what I've heard, the average for them is like 5-ish years. Obviously, my adult dorsalis are pushing that now. I think they might even be 6 now. The Smaragdinus, I have no idea. They came in as adults, and I've had them for 2 years already, and they're not really showing any signs of slowing down. So maybe Armen, you've just been keeping them for longer than I have, but
yeah, whenever I've had any pass away, it's like I didn't know they were it's like some freak thing, or just all of a sudden I found them. It's not like I watched them age. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a matter of kind of learning better how. I really don't know how long they can live because I've never had one more than I've only been into them like 3.5, 4 years. And the longest one I've had was like 3.5 years old. But then again, I don't know. I'm sure they can live much, much longer than 5 years. Not enough people keep them. And the people who have kept them they're just like not on podcasts like this. So we don't know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, like you said, it's the guys with them in their basements that are just keeping them and privately and not talking about them. How many people are keeping and breeding them right now in North America? I mean, I'm sure we don't know the exact list, but I feel like in Canada, I don't see very many of them at all. Mike, you're the only one that I know is working with them. Do you know anybody else in Canada that's working with them?
Those species, like the specific ones that I have, as far as I know, I'm the only one. I have sold a couple pairs out, so there will be more popping up here and there, but like it'd be ignorant of me to say I'm the only one for sure. But besides those, the old men in their basement, like, yeah, there's nobody that I can really think of. I think there's definitely a handful of them in the States, though.
Yeah, there's me, there's Mason, there was Rico, and he's sold so many. So the thing is, there's, like we talked about, there's so many people probably with them that we don't know about. And a lot of people get them as pets just because it was a cool lizard and they don't have any plans on breeding them or anything. And if they get eggs, they don't know what to do. So, but I have sold probably I think I've sold at least 10 pairs to other people that are breeding them. So, and people that I've sold pairs to, it's cool when they send me pictures of their eggs. It's like, whoa, that's awesome. So I know there are at least a dozen other people in the US consistently breeding them. And they don't even really pop up often online for sale because their people's friends see them and they're like, oh, I want those. So they're already sold before they're hatched. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of one of those lizards where it's like you kind of have to know someone. You got to know a guy. So it's they're cool that way. But there's definitely people breeding them and they're getting popular, but not enough people yet.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that over time they become more popular because they are such a fascinating and unique species. And like I said, they're very unassuming. When you first see them, you think, maybe that's not the coolest lizard I've seen or the most interesting. But then when you start actually dialing in on their behaviors and the amount of the incredible setup that you can have with them and the fact that they can be co-habbed and, all those different things, it just makes them such a fascinating animal. Is there anything else about them that we kind of missed that you guys wanted to mention before we start wrapping up the show? I think we covered a lot of it.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I think
one thing might be even if someone can't find dorsalis or smaragdinus immediately, I think giving sexlineatus a go is worth it because they have the same personality and I have some. I just because I'm like I have these other two and I don't have this one. Might as well just add it because I already have the enclosure, right? I just put them in the enclosure next door, treat them the same. It's just they're just as cool. They're not as bright, but to a lot of people it doesn't quite matter. And if you're waiting to get a pair of dorsalis or smaragdinus, then those are a great one to get your feet wet.
Yeah. And you don't have to spend a couple $100 per. Keep in mind they're more than likely wild caught. You might have to deal with the host of issues that come with that. So that might make them over $200 after your first vet trip. But I know that's a great suggestion. Like, I think that's one of the factors that they are everything you want in a slightly cheaper, maybe less flashy package.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because there's lots of species of lizards that are not flashy in color, but people still love them. Even something as simple as a leopard gecko, right? Like it's not that amazing bright green that people get their eyes attracted to. So really, it does have to come down to the personality and the behavior of the animal. And if you like that, and you're not interested in spending $600 on a pair, you can easily start with them and at least learn how to care for them before you upgrade to something more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered everything with this genus. I really hope that it has inspired some people to at least look into them and find some more information about them. As far as sources of information, is there any places that you guys have drawn to that you find very helpful? I mean, obviously, I know, Mike, you have some videos on your YouTube channel, or should we just all text Armen?
I literally get messages every day asking me. So you got to go watch Mike's video and I need to make a video, but there's really no good comprehensive information. Even on sexlineatus, it's like a WikiHow. It's like not very good info.
Yeah, honestly, that's probably another one of the major downsides is they are such cool lizards, but there's such little information known about them. I mean, I went to the extent of I posted on the Takydromus Facebook group, and somebody replied with like a Dutch or a German link to some dude's website that wrote a care article in Dutch. So I had to like Google Translate and like fix all the weird errors, the syntax errors and stuff that are made, and kind of put it together myself. And that was like the most reliable source of information that I could find. Truthfully, I'm in the process. Like I have read probably 10 or 15 papers on them, like talking about their like optimal temperatures, their run speed, like clutch size, that kind of deal. And I'm putting together a care video. So hopefully that will be useful to anybody that is listening to this podcast. And like Armen said, it would be great if he made a couple videos as well. But yeah, I think it's really up to hobbyists to start talking about them more. And even the people that I see all the time in the Takydromus group on Facebook, like they don't really post online. Even in that group, there's not a care guide. Like it's crazy.
Well, hopefully, even I think this episode should give people enough foundation to just, even if someone was like, I'm really interested in them and I've kept reptiles before, I think you could actually go buy one and actually have no issues by just, the conversation that we had here tonight with just some of the basics, lighting, heating, the enclosure size and whatnot. But yeah, it would be good to have that probably is one of the biggest sticking points if there's not an actual good source of information. So I think we'll hold you guys both to that. You're gonna have to make something, or else you're gonna have to continue asking or answering messages.
Fair.
I do that to Armen all the time. Check out this anole.
Yeah. What is this? Tell me what this is. Well, can you each tell everybody where they can find, maybe we'll start with Armen, where they can find you online and any information about yourself?
Yeah. So TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all HerpTime, HerpTime. And I breed a lot of small lizards. Of course, I have some larger ones as pets, but I focus mainly on small lizards. Anoles, Takydromus, stuff like that. So right up my alley, and yeah, that's about it.
And then Mike, what about yourself?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Instagram at Alpha Reptile, or Mike Tytula, just my name. And then we also have a website, thejunglevault.ca, where we sell hog noses, the Takydromus. We'll be working on fleshing it out and eventually selling some plants, like custom made vivariums and stuff as well.
Have you made on YouTube, is there a playlist for Takydromus? I know you have quite a few videos. Have you made a playlist? Or
I believe, I have like the Emerald Dragon series that I call it, and that's the best place in terms of like all the videos that I've made on them specifically are there.
Okay, cool. So I'll put that in the show notes as well, so people can go binge that if they want some more visual content and some more just general information about them. And then hopefully at some point you guys will have more detailed care. But for now, I think this was a good episode to introduce people to the genus and hopefully get people excited about other species that can be just as great as some of the other favorites that we have within herpetoculture. So I thank you both for being here. This is a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up? I think we pretty much got it all.
I just say, don't hesitate to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
I got my DMs open, so I answer as many as I possibly can, and I answer every question or comment on Facebook or YouTube as well. So if there's any questions.
Same here. Comments are tough for me because I get a lot, but if you have a question, best place to ask me is message me on Instagram. And even if it takes me a few days, I reply to every comment as long as it's not a super weird one, or every message. So just send me a normal message asking about them, and I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah, as long as you don't hit the weird side of the scale, you'll definitely get a response.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. This was a pleasure chatting with you as always. And like I said, this will be a great episode to introduce people to the genus. So I'm glad that we're able to do this.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Mike and Armen, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and sharing all your information. And I do hope that as time goes on, both of you kind of take it upon yourselves to add some more information to the internet about this genus. As we said in the podcast, there's not enough information out there about them, but I do really appreciate you coming on and sharing all the information that you do know to date. And to listeners, you don't think that we're wrong when we say this is a genus that deserves more recognition, because after listening to the episode, I'm sure you're interested in them, and they're such a fascinating genus. And again, I'll repeat it one more time. Keeping smaller species is probably our way. It is a very direct way to keep animals more ethically, because it's just, you can provide so much more for them, and they don't destroy your enclosures, and they're fascinating to watch and interactive and smart, and they do check a lot of the boxes when it comes to keeping pets. So I do hope you enjoyed that episode, and even if you don't want to keep a Takydromus, hopefully you found the episode interesting to listen to, and then next time you see one in the store or at a expo, you'll recognize the species. Again, thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you did enjoy it, make sure you share it on social media. If you're looking for more information on this podcast, head to animalsathome.network.com. If you would like to join us over on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. As I said through the intro, we're inching our way closer to the goal of having the podcast editing covered through the Patreon account. So that is huge. That's a $500 per month goal, and we're quite close to that. So hopefully we can hit that in the next couple of months. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're looking for any high quality reptile enclosures, make sure you go check them out. If you do use one of the links that is in the description on YouTube or in the show notes, that is an affiliate link for me. If you do use that link and end up making a purchase, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And again, that is another way you can help support the show. Until next time, I assume this episode is coming out after Christmas. Yes, it'll be out after Christmas. So hopefully you had a great holiday season, a great Christmas, and I think this episode should be out before New Year's. So happy New Year's to everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode.